Welcome back to the last plenary session of the Symposium, Enhancing Public Understanding and Building Trust, the Road Forward. There have been discussion in the society as to whether IPCC should be conferred with more statutory power and functions. This plenary session will discuss whether it would necessarily bring public confidence and trust, or whether there are other alternatives that would help to achieve such goal. The moderator and speakers will also explore the room to enhance the trust in the tripartite relations among IPCC, police, and the public under the current system, especially through enhancing IPCC's transparency by the means of public relations, education, and stakeholders' engagement initiatives. And in doing so, how duty of confidentiality can be balanced. First, please welcome our moderator of this session, Dr. Lo Chi-Kin, a public affairs and lobbying specialist. He's also the fellow of Hong Kong Policy Research Institute and former IPCC member. Please also welcome our four distinguished panel speakers in this session. Dr. Robert Zhong, Director of Public Opinion Program, the University of Hong Kong. Professor Chase Harrison, Associate Director, Program on Survey Research, Institute for Quantitative Social Sciences, Harvard University. Ms. Lau Chi Wei Edwina, Director of Management Services, Hong Kong Police Force, and also Professor Loi Tai Lok, Vice President, Research and Development, the Education University of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MC. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So we are going to start our final plenary session of today's symposium. Before we start, learning from the speakers of the previous panels, I would like to set the rule first and also make the rule transparent so that you can follow and don't argue with me when the rules are enforced. First of all, let's make it easy, and I'll go by first name. Although some are very old friends like Robert or Dialogue. Some are relatively new friends like Edwina, some completely new friend like Chase. So Chase, to make it simple, let's all go by first name. Secondly, we have a tight schedule today, and we hope to end timely by 5 o'clock. And then there will be a closing remark by the Permanent Secretary of the Bureau. So we have allocated 10 minutes to each speaker, and they'll be notified 2 minutes before the 10 minutes are up. So I'll be very generous in the last minute to let them finish, but please be on time. Thank you very much for that. Because I hope that there can be some interaction between the speakers and the audience, we have a very outstanding panel today, and surely we'd like to listen to them, but surely we'd also like to listen to the interactions with the audience. Among our speakers today, we have two very prominent experts in public opinion surveys. They'll start first, and then followed by Professor Loi Tai Lok, who's an old friend, but at the same time who's done a lot of good work studying the socio-political trends in Hong Kong, so you can look deeper into the societal forces that shape the public perceptions that would be described by the public opinion experts. And then Edwina, as the representative of the force, will bring the force perspective to the panel so that we can have a very balanced discussion. So Chase, as our visitor as a visitor to Hong Kong, we give you honor to go first. Thank you.
Use my handy little device here to track the time. So I do want to thank the ICPP, the university, the public opinion program, and for this invitation. It's really an honor and a privilege to be able to talk with you. My specialty is not policing or police oversight or independent policing. In any way, I have a little bit of expertise in public opinion and survey methods, but I'm going to talk today about public opinion and confidence and trust in government with a focus on the United States and Europe, but also try to look at some trends around the world. And I'm drawing on large-scale mass public opinion surveys. In all cases, these are excellent quality public opinion polls conducted in different countries, different places, different times, different settings. But just to begin, I thought we might look at trust in the United States, and something that we found, a drop in trust, a decline in trust. This is a trend heading from 1958 down roughly to now, and we can see there's been a huge decline in confidence in the government and trust in government. So this is a line of people who trust the government to do what's right all of the time or most of the time, and we just see it's declining down. Note, this is nothing new. This has been happening for a long period of time, so we may think it's accelerated. It's been a relatively steady downward trend with some variation. Just looking at how rational is this, or do people make distinctions between different sorts of things? So the top line is trusting the government in international affairs. Bottom line is domestic. You see similar trends, but for the most part, slightly more trust in the national government in the international affairs than domestic affairs. Just moving on, this is looking at 3 levels of government. So here's where we start to see some interesting distinctions. The top line, the gray line, is your local government, the most regional. The orange line is, I'm sorry, I missed this. The blue is right here. This is the executive branch of government. At the top is judicial, and at the bottom is legislative. So we've seen the judiciary ends up maintaining slightly more trust than some of the more political branches. So this is just one of the first takeaways to keep in mind. Here, I guess the second takeaway, now you'll note the gray line, top line, that's what's closer, local. We also have the state and the regional. Note that what is closer, that is to say my local government, has been more stable. Trust over the years has not declined as much. If I'm looking at things that are up here, this is what's close to me. This is what's my state, my provincial, regional government, a little bit lower, and the bottom, the blue, is the federal government. So again, note some trends here. I'm going to move forward a little bit and look at this as confidence in different institutions. This is now just a cross-sectional time point. Blue is lots of confidence, orange is a little bit, and so you can think of the orange as being at least somewhat positive, but the blue is really good. I just want to show that in terms of branches, at 2018, the police ends up being the 3rd most trusted, or group with the highest confidence, similar to small business and the military. Note small business. We move down, we have a court right here, and we move down Congress, television, news, very negative. I'd also point out criminal justice system. So we have the U.S. Supreme Court, relatively respected, criminal justice system, a little bit less. In the context of the U.S., this is often talking about cases where we've had very harsh sentences, lifetime sentences, very long sentences for relatively minor offenses, possession of a little bit of marijuana, something. So there's some bit there, some other things, but just looking at trends in different institutions. I just want to move on here. This is over time. Lots of messy lines, but there are 2 that we can really focus on. We see lots of things that are low. We see trust in the police. So I'm just kind of focusing this here, relatively stable over the years. This is since 1993 up to the present time. Military actually does even better than the police. So something to think about how people look at institutions. Toward the bottom, we have the criminal justice system. Congress, big business. Again, note big business versus small business, I believe. ends up higher. I don't have on this system, but just thinking there are different levels of trust in different institutions. So national, we've seen a real decline in national trust, local government more stable, police, which is something actually that's very close to people and something they experience relatively more stable. So I'm going to move on now and look in Europe. We see a somewhat different situation in Europe where we've had more stability. This is not as long a time trend. These are actually European Union surveys. The top is trust in the European Union. So here we see the further more removed institution, actually a little bit more trust than the national parliament and the national government, which are the gray and the red. But just something to keep in mind that there is some variation in these trends across different national situations. I want to take a look, just a couple of things here. These are different European countries, and so the bars in this case look at trust in the political system. Now something new here, interpersonal trust, just how trusting individuals are, is something that we know varies culturally in different places. And so the red dots look at interpersonal trust. Up here in general, keeping this sense that Northern Europe, the Scandinavian countries, often very high level of government performance, very high level of life satisfaction, very high level of interpersonal trust, also high trust generally in the political system. Switzerland is perhaps looking at Finland, Norway, Denmark. Malta's here, a very happy place. It's a beautiful island. Sweden, and then we have some more southern European countries down here where we actually see relatively high levels of interpersonal trust but lower political system trust. So note there's different variations in the gap, if you will, between interpersonal trust and political trust based on different countries. I won't talk about all of the reasons for that here. We don't really know all the reasons, but now I'm looking at European countries, same countries, but I've graphed things from left to right in terms of trust in the police. And that's the blue bars. The yellow line is trust in the judiciary. So this is again noting that we're seeing judicial and police trust somewhat the same. Trust in the political system, the red diamonds in all cases lower. Although you should look that in some cases there are relatively big gaps, some cases relatively small gaps. The ordering of these is different. So destiny isn't completely determined by where we're sitting and some general level of happiness, right? There are institutional factors and other things that cause differences in these gaps. So that would be another takeaway just to think about is that the relative difference between trust in judicial systems, police, and government is actually quite different. And these are all European Union countries. There's a pretty strong variety of political systems here, political stability, different economies, different levels of societal wealth. So trust is more stable in Europe. There's significant variation across nations. Trust is higher than the police trust in police is higher than the political system generally, but there's lots of national variation. And the judiciary has a little bit less trust than the police as a whole. But weak relationship is one of the things I would point out here, the weak relationship between the political system and trust. So in my final 30 seconds, I'm just going to look at a couple of things. I've been timing this here on this wonderful, wonderful device that I'm not using for social media. Here we're looking at national trends. So these are national level studies around the world. There's maybe some variation in the quality of this data, but largely these are good public national studies looking at confidence in national governments. We also have trust in the police worldwide. I mean, this is just showing you there's a variety of global trends. Darker blue is higher. Looking at relationships. So our vertical axis here is trust in the police. This is confidence in the government. There's a positive relationship, but the takeaway here would really be take a look at who some of these outliers are. Singapore, Switzerland do very high on a lot of these issues. Some of these are low. That Rwanda, that is a data, that's actually real data, but I think there's a problem with it. So I meant to update that. If we move a little bit further here, we see a negative. This is corruption sort of along the bottom. And I'll just do a couple of more of these slides, but the point I'm making, so I'm plotting really a straight linear relationship between one variable and the other here, confidence in local police, confidence in the judiciary, and it's really important to look that some places outperform on one of these variables than the other. Some of them underperform on one than the other. So you start with the high destiny. In Hong Kong and China, in the places where we have good data, tend to be more on this side of the graph with high levels of trust than this. And that's certainly Hong Kong true in police and other institutions. But it's important to keep in mind that changes and differences in trust, confidence institutions, things at the local level don't always follow at the national level. I think Robert's going to talk a little bit more about some things with the Hong Kong situation very much, but just to look at this, that there's significant regional variations, and really keeping in mind that trust in local institutions, and this is something we've seen in the U.S., much higher than national level. So the closer to home, the higher it is, easier it is to preserve trust, the harder it is to lose it. So thank you.
Thank you, Chase. Thank you. So Robert, your turn.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I will start my presentation with two notes of thanks. One is for the police force and the IPCC for bringing me to all 4 symposiums up to this moment as a speaker all the time. And this time, I'm more honored to be involved in organizing this conference or symposium as well. And I think I contributed a little bit to the title of it because I thought the issue of trust is very important, not just to police and IPCC, and actually to our entire society. As you just heard, Chase's presentation is a global issue. So I was lucky to have met Chase actually 2 weeks ago in Toronto. So I saw how he will present. So you see this chart is actually his. So you see that, okay, this is the trust in the United States from the 1950s. I'm imposing it the Hong Kong graph. So you see the chart. I'm using a very simple indicator of trust, just people's level of trust in the local Hong Kong government. Now, of course, we started our surveys in the 90s, so we could not have that long chart. But still, if you look at the Hong Kong chart and compare it with what Chase has just presented, we are witnessing a similar trend, downward trend of trust in Hong Kong. So this is one point. And then this again is another chart by Chase, and this is the last one from you. The European opinion. Of course, the chart is much shorter because it started from 94, but I think Chase has explained to you that this is a chart of the European people's faith in the various institutions like the European Union, or the regional or local parliament government. So the conclusion then was, in Europe, people tend to trust the European Union, that means the bigger institution, more than the local. But what about Hong Kong? So we have a longer chart this time. I've plotted people's trust in the Hong Kong, that means local government, and also what we now call the national government, but before the handover, we just called the Beijing government. But we have a long time series starting from 1992, and you can see that the faith for trust in local government is really the red line, and then the national or the bigger government is the lower line. And this finding sort of contrasted with the European finding, in that if you take the local government as the average, then our national government, the Beijing government, actually people trust them less on average. But then in real times, when people sort of reverse it, And there are a lot of history behind it. But if you see those intersection points, then you probably could see that the lowest level of trust registered in this chart is about 2003. That is the moment when we have there's a governance crisis, first time after the handover. And you see actually people by then trusted the national government more than the local government. And then in the thing, the two charts flip over again. And if you see the chart after around 2008, trust in or faith in local government has been on the other hand all along. But the last point, I could use this, okay. The last point you can see is dropping, recently is dropping for both. So that is the macro picture. And I'm plotting this just to sort of illustrate that we can measure trust in a lot of ways. And the chart that you have just seen is actually a mean score chart. That means we have a 5-point scale, trust very much, a little, and so on and so forth. And we work out our mean average, and that is a variation from 1 to 5. So the midpoint is really 3. So we also have other measurements like percentage trust. Actually, what you've seen in Chase's presentation and my consumer impulse chart, we're using his unit, percentage trust. But now we flip it to other units. But the point is, whichever unit you're using, we did a lot of calculation. They point to almost the same thing. Of course, there are some variations, and we could explain it with the sort of a question effect, wording effect. But the general macro trend is like this. All right? So I try to use this sort of average layman kind of concept of trust and see if it matches with other indicators. So one of them, we use the so-called public sentiment index, and we designed that. But public sentiment basically means how people feel in general, political, social, everything together, and we have a chart. And if we compare it with the trust level, trust is just one indicator, one dimension which we want to dwell into for this conference. But if you use that as a standard, then you see it co-varies, right? So trust co-varies with people's happiness. Of course, there are sometimes bigger gaps, smaller gaps. So that is the overall kind of picture. And you now see this very kind of messy one, okay, messy picture, because we are now putting all the indicators, a lot of indicators go together, so it's sometimes difficult to make sense of it. So we produce a dynamic graph, and I'm showing you the way to play around with this dynamic graph if you get it. We put all these indicators together. Actually, we could put many more, but let's just look at all these. So let's clear everything, and then just concentrate on the trust. Now, trust, we have this line, and we like to match this variation with other measurements. So what could we do? Now, I'm here putting here, for example, Hong Kong people's approval rate of the chief executive. So you know a chief executive, you met one this morning, right? But we had a lot of chief executives since handover, and I have Chris Patton there, but I just take him out, right? And you can see that, well, it co-varies as well, but the fluctuation differs, and there are again a lot of story behind it. And we could see two very bad times. That is time in 2003, when we really had people marching, and that was a big time. And then we had another big dip, and that was the time of the umbrella movement. And that is probably the most recent one we have. So this morning I have been asked, are we facing the same crisis? So I said, I do not have a crystal ball, but if we just look at all these fluctuations, maybe I'm not yet up to that. We're not yet that bad, but we'll have to wait and see. But this is one kind of matching of the trust with various items. Obviously today is the police force, so where is the police satisfaction goes when we measure this? So you can see that trust, or in the police question, we actually use satisfaction. The satisfaction rate, so to speak, the average one, fluctuates, but co-varies a bit, but it is a bit higher on the upper side of the of all the indicators. And if we just put the SAR government satisfaction, and they are really apple to apple measurement, then you can see there's always a gap there. So somehow this concurs with what Chase has mentioned, that in spite of all these variations, sometimes drop, sometimes climbing trust, the police in Hong Kong is doing better, actually much better than the government in general. So there must be a reason to that, so maybe we could explore it. But because this is an IPCC conference, so we have a very short history compared to the rest of the exercises we have done, but IPCC is fluctuating as well. And you can see that it also co-varies. And the level of satisfaction is more or less like the police one. Okay, so we're happy to say that. I am happy to say that. There are always tensions between the police and the IPCC, and we are the middleman. We are serving the police and also serving the IPCC, where we just measure people's sentiment, and I hope that helps both parties. So this comes to the police ratings. So I just tease out the more important ratings, and this is actually a repetition of what I've just shown you. This is the chart, the trust of the overall Hong Kong government. And if you put that, this one is the Hong Kong police, so it fluctuates. So this again shows that the police enjoys fairly comparatively better appraisal in terms of institutional image. Now, I think the next two slides is very technical. I just want to show you that actually we have been engaged with the police in measuring public opinion for a long, long time. And that was since 1994 was the time when the police set up the service quality wing, and then we started to be engaged. And actually, public opinion survey, customer satisfaction survey, staff survey of the police, they all started very early, 94, 95. So it was a very, very early start that the police started to measure public sentiment on the police force. So at the end, we found that that was very useful. Because, it took a lot of effort, time, and resources as well to plan all these survey cycles. And this is the police survey cycle. We are now also engaging with the IPCC on an annual basis. Of course, that's only for 7 years. The police has a very long history working with us. So put away all these nitty-gritties. I think one very important aspect that I would like to really discuss a little bit more is about youth opinion. Because in recent years, you've seen all those charts, but I didn't break it up into age groups. And if we really break it up, then that is interesting. Because this is the trust in government first, okay? You remember government popularity compared with police and IPCC. But you could see that in Hong Kong, the local youth, of course, we move. It's not a cohort study, it's a youth study, okay? So we always look at the youth group. And we found that for the youth group, we could see that there are gaps, widening gaps between youth and non-youth, and non-youth you could say adults, but I prefer using non-youth. So I'm a non-youth, okay? Right? So you can see that, in the trust as a background, and then you can see the youth's rating of the government in terms of satisfaction has actually been dropping much, much faster, okay? But in terms of the non-youth, then you can see, yes, there is a drop, but it's relatively not that much. But the gap between youth and non-youth are widening. So that seems to be a problem. This problem didn't happen before 2009, 2008. So perhaps also look at the satisfaction. This is a new measurement. The previous measurement is trust. This is a very similar measurement, but we are talking about another unit. But you're seeing almost exactly the same picture. And what about police? Police is the line right now. We can see that when we look at our time series, there also is a very similar pattern that the youth's satisfaction rating of the police force has been dropping, widening the gap with the non-youth, and this has been an issue. And many of our symposiums and actual presentations discuss that. So let me just go very quickly to the summary points first and see if I could offer anything useful. Declining trust from a global perspective also applies to Hong Kong. People somehow differs from the Europeans in Hong Kong, differs from the Europeans in that we seem to trust the local government much more than the national government, and for good reason, I think. And then if we look at police and IPCC, comparatively speaking, they are still being taken with high regards compared to other institutions. But there's this widening gap between adults and youths. So I'd like to spend a bit more time on, so what next? And I have been discussing with Chase for quite some weeks now, where we could present all the findings, but do we have any solutions? And I could also just say that it's very difficult, but at least let me try. And I will try by just repeating first what I sort of concluded in 2013 Police Symposium in this university. And you can see that at that time I said, it's 2013, I said police have a lot of challenges. But within the force itself, there's this credibility, empathy, legitimacy issue that the force members should learn all these concepts and try to embrace them and then work with them. But there were challenges from society at large, like the emergence of a new media, like cybercrime, like a changing political ecology, and bear in mind that it was 2013. Now we all know it already happened. But in 2013, it was not that serious. But we detected that political ecology was changing, and people actually had new expectations on the force. It's not just a corruption-free personal conduct, but also facing protest demonstrations. So I said new paradigms, methods are needed. And then 1 year later in the Symposium IPCC in this same room 5 years ago, I ended with this note and said, it's a challenge for the force and also IPCC that at least there are three important areas. One is a conflict between officers and protesters. And it's the crowd management and other issues. And then there is this continuing political, sociological changes of the environment. And then, just like today, we have already started to discuss police power and civil rights. So we are still discussing it today. That was 2014. 2016, just another big police symposium. And I actually suggested that we should put more effort. And I was talking to the police then. More effort to enhance surveys, opinion data, and online discussions, and also enhance quality opinion collection like deliberation and also enhancing engaging in the manuals. Now, this is 2019, what is our challenge? So I sort of dim the less important ones and retain the more important concept. I think they are still very relevant. Credibility, legitimacy, socio-political environment, police rights, and civil rights, and I highlight the last two. I think the tools to be really grabbed to our advantage now is really to think of and use as much as possible the concept and also the skill of deliberation and engagement. I think today is one kind of engagement, but of course this is a very expert engagement, but we need to engage more people on the street. I'm not quite sure how many minutes I have.
No more.
Oh, no more, okay, all right. So I should end by perhaps posting an interesting question. I have been asking myself, what is trust? Perhaps nobody have defined trust up to this moment. And I'm not going to define it, but I could think of phrases like, I trust you, what does that mean? I support you, I am satisfied with you. What does that mean? I love you, what does that mean? And love is unconditional if I say I love you, right? But if I say I trust you, I think there's some condition within it. There should be some mutual kind of relationship. There should be some kind of mutual respect. We used this term earlier. It's mutual. It's conditional in some sense. And if I'm going to trust somebody, and if you're going to trust somebody, that body has to demonstrate some kind of reliability, some kind of consistency, some kind of sincerity, some kind of honesty, some kind of integrity. So if you really want to build trust, it's not really to say that, please trust me, please trust me. A lot of people say, trust me, trust me, trust me. Actually, they think people do not trust them. The more they say, please trust me, actually, I think they are worried they are not trusted. So my really final word for you is that I think this is, if you want to pocket just one point, just this point from me, trust the people, and people will trust you. Do trust me on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. So we've learned a lot about the data from the two opinion survey experts. Let's look deeper into the societal forces behind the phenomenon. So I give the time to dialogue. You want to speak here or you speak from your seat? Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. Thanks, Jikin, and thanks the organizer for the invitation. It's really my pleasure to have the opportunity of coming here. And quite honestly, before coming here, I know very little about IPCC. So the invitation is important so that I have to do a little bit of homework. Otherwise, I would just think IPCC is a council that occasionally I see the face of the chairperson on the TV screen and probably full stop. But the more I know about it, the more I recognize the importance of the council. So thanks for the invitation. I don't have a PowerPoint, so no worry, and I will finish within 10 minutes.
Can I trust you?
I would think so. I think both Chase and Robert's research are very important in the sense that we do need to measure trust, and it's very important for us to understanding the trend of development, as well as how people's pattern of trust have been changing. But personally, I'm probably more interested in not just knowing about the trend, but also would love to see if there's a certain kind of threshold where the percentage of trust, if it drops to a certain extent, that probably it would generate some sort of negative feedback into the system that would further reinforce distrust. This is something that we need to be aware of. Otherwise, quite honestly, in Hong Kong, in general speaking, I do think that people do have rather high trust on our police force. Basically, I keep reminding my students that every day, every hour, we see policing, patrolling in the street, but never find it intimidating. Basically, when a policeman or a policewoman approaches us, we never feel threatened and start running and so on and so forth. Compared with my experience of going to Joburg in South Africa or Moscow in Russia, it's entirely different stories, quite honestly. Every time if someone asks me for my passport, dressed like a policeman in Moscow, it seems to be the beginning of a crime. And in Joburg, that I keep sharing this with a lot of my friends in the police force, is that it's the first time in my life that when I check in the hotel, I was asked to read the directory very carefully, because the person who knocked at the door and said they want to clean your room, that don't open the door because it's very likely they're not our staff, and make sure that you ensure that you are safe. But in Hong Kong, I don't think that this sort of thing would ever pop up in our mind. But having said that, I do think that not only that we need to identify the threshold, meaning that if there's a drop, it's not exactly about whether there's a drop or not, but what's the extent or the slope of that curve. At the same time, I would love to see perhaps in future more data on Hong Kong people's perception of trust of the police force, in the sense that I'm sure that they have a high trust of the police force as such. But what about individual policemen and policewomen? Would there be a gap between sort of more institutional trust and trust at the individual level? This is particularly interesting if we look at the data that just been examined by Robert. Is about the gap between the adult and the youth and the non-youth. And nowadays, whenever I talk to my students about trust on government, on police force, and so on and so forth, I do find that we have a very different framework and perspective of understanding what's going on, and we pick entirely different examples. Whereas I would keep saying that how safe we are and how unlikely that you would be robbed by a policeman in Hong Kong. I don't think it ever happened, but basically you don't need to worry about that. Whereas in some other countries, that probably you won't think in the same way. But when I talk to my younger friends, then I heard a lot of stories that remind me of the very, very old days. Pre-1966 Hong Kong, that kind of thing. don't walk into the dark corner, otherwise you will be grabbed by policemen and then you will be, beaten up and so on and so forth. For me, it's, are you sure you're talking about Hong Kong or otherwise? But young people, I think the gap in the perception of trust would be very important. And in this regard, I do think IPCC and the police force as a whole do need to think more, as I find out from Robert's PowerPoint that earlier symposiums that you touch on the issue about empathy. I do think that we need to work on that, and particularly important is some kind of contextual understanding of how the police force uphold law and order. What sort of considerations, what sort of issues that you have to bear in mind when you go out to the street and maintain law and order, and what kind of issues that when some of our younger friends perceive and look at what they see as reality. For instance, again, in my conversation with the younger friends that I said, it has never occurred to me that if I'm unhappy with the government, that I can just walk out into the tramway and sit down and say, I'm not happy. And when the policemen come to move you out of the tramway, you think that, they are unconstitutional. For me, I never thought about this, but quite honestly, my students would think that, what's wrong with me sitting in Admiralty and blocking something for the right cause? Why shouldn't I do it? They don't seem to have the same sort of understanding or contextual understanding of how the police force would enforce law and order in order to maintain the routines of ordinary life. But basically, in terms of measurement of trust, I do think that Hong Kong is on the safe side. But having said that, again, I think we need to go back to the concept of trust. Robert highlighted mutuality and so on. But at the same time, I do think, and I said as a sociologist, I would also look at trust as some sort of quality in our everyday life that is actually something quite ambivalent and also interesting. It's not easy to pin down what exactly it is. One of the central characters of trust is that in our interpersonal relations or interinstitutional relations, there's always an opportunity to expose ourselves to certain kind of opportunistic behavior. Otherwise, you don't need to talk about trust. I trust someone because he can actually lie to me, he can cheat, and so that I put trust on him so that I believe he won't do something like this to me. 2 weeks ago, probably you won't believe it, by accident, I find out a piece of paper that my father passed it on to me. He passed away something like 10, 12 years ago. Well, how come I discovered the piece of paper just now? Don't ask. But I just discovered the piece of paper, and then actually it's attached to a painting and said, Tai Lok, I think I would like to give it to you. Well, bingo, good. But I can't say thank you, he passed away already, but okay, that's a very nice painting. So I took it and went to a shop and I said, I want to reframe it. And then when I was talking to that craftsman and doing the framing, I said, okay, you give me a receipt, I give the money to do framing. He just write down the receipt saying, it's a Wok Hua, it's a Chinese painting. And you come back in a week's time, the date of delivery. And I said, oh, this is a pretty good painting. Can you write something more? Say, this is a good painting. He said, what do you mean? I said, it may be quite expensive. Look. He said, okay, expensive painting. And then I said, what if I come back and then I don't get my painting framed? He said, why are you coming here? I said, well, I do have some concern, right? You can just take away my painting and then fit something different inside, and then, so I lost my painting. He said, well, if you don't trust me, don't come. This is it. I said, can I take a picture? He said, I can send it to Shenzhen and someone can paint the same way. If I want to steal a painting, I can always do it. At the end, of course, I just, put down my deposit, I let him do it. Next week I go back, I think I get my painting back. This is trust. If you really don't trust that person, that it won't work. The point I want to make is, I think at present, most people in Hong Kong still have high trust on the police. But when you talk about building trust for IPCC or further work on building trust is a lot more difficult. I noticed that you have the observer system. I noticed that you have tried to select members from all walks of life. And then, of course, the very fact that they are appointed by the CE means that they are notable persons and respectable persons from different sectors. But if you ask a lot of our younger friends, when they don't trust you, then they will say that, okay, this is not entirely transparent. This is not entirely representative. Some of the people of my own kind of opinion never get selected. And the very fact that it's appointed by CE means that there's a conspiracy behind it. And so on and so forth. And don't laugh, I mean, the same applies to the council of a university. The same applies to any public organization. And it's very difficult for you to convince that, look, we already have members from different sectors. So what's wrong? I don't have a solution, but I just want to say that, that's why we probably need to think more about, point number one, create the sort of empathy that I just mentioned on. And the second thing is when you work on trust building, probably we take a longer process and pay attention to issues that probably would respond to this sort of hypothetical questions. For example, whether there would be any indicators that you are actually more inclusive in terms of allowing people from wider spectrum of opinion to be part of your institution, or to allow for some sort of processes that to ensure that there would be people not only just being a token of certain sector, but actually they are recognized or respected persons from a particular section of our society. Perhaps I'll just stop here, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalaj. So now let's hear from the police force, Edwina.
Thank you, CK. So good afternoon, distinguished guests. First of all, it's my real honor to be here and thank Chairman and IPCC for the invitation. Also thanks to Professor Harrison for the broad picture of the confidence and trust around the globe, and Dr. Zhong and Professor Loy on the trust level and perception of trust, especially in Hong Kong. Here in my presentation, we're more localized, and I'm going to talk about our own system in Hong Kong. So let me turn to the title of this plenary again, Enhancing Public Understanding and Building Trust, the road forward. As you've heard a few times today, one of the key questions has always been whether IPCC should be conferred with the investigative function. So in my next 10 minutes, I'll attempt to argue that even without the investigative function, the current complaint system is working effectively, and the current Hong Kong system is most appropriate at this point in time, given under the current context. And I'm going to reassure you with some observations and hopefully to enhance your trust level in our own system. So for the benefit of a minority of those here who are not too familiar with our current two-tier system, let me just very quickly go through it. So in simple terms, the complaint against the police office, in short, CAPO, investigates the complaint, and IPCC observes, monitors, reviews, and endorses the complaints. For CAPO, it's a unit totally separated from other formations. It comprises of 13 investigation teams and 137 investigators, headed by a chief superintendent and assistant commissioner. CAPO handles all investigation independently. They submit every single reportable complaint to IPCC for scrutiny, and IPCC needs to endorse each and every one of them before a case can be closed. So IPCC has become a statutory independent oversight body since 10 years ago, and the office now is empowered by a wide range of powers, such as to demand the police to provide any materials, observe any interviews and collection of evidence with or without prior notice, interview any person, raise queries about complaint investigations, and finally make recommendation to Commissioner of Police or the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong SAR. So as you've heard from the chairman earlier this morning and our two ex-chairmen, IPCC has evolved significantly since the 1980s. So this evolved system has been time-tested. Now the current system would not only give a proper and independent channel for any redress of grievances and complaint from the public. The system maintains a high integrity and evidence-based standard in order to ensure an impartial investigation and a fair treatment for both the complainants and the complainees. And also, rather importantly, there's been a very effective platform for the police force to enhance our quality of service. As mentioned by the chairman earlier on, there's a management outcome on this process. So to look at what can be improved. As a piece of additional information for you, actually over 85% of the complaints are minor complaints, and that means they are allegations of neglect of duty, misconduct, offensive language, and improper manner. And by that I mean not meeting expectations of the public or having a mismatch of expectation between the public and the police. And also, police officers are being rude at times. So these are all the minor complaints. So with the capital officers allowing capital officers to handle the cases directly, it allows the force to know exactly from within the expectation of the public and any issues of service quality. So in gist, I think the current system is most appropriate in the current context in helping the Hong Kong police to offer redress to the public, rectifying individual officers' misconduct, and even identifying deficiency in police procedures under the monitoring of the IPCC. Now let me provide some assurance on the standard of our people and the quality of the system, hopefully to enhance your trust on the current system. On people, in CAPO, majority of our CAPO investigators are trained for criminal investigations and equipped with professional investigative skills. All of them have gone through a robust vetting process to ensure a high level of integrity. Training will be provided, and amongst other things, CAPO investigators are value-driven to uphold impartiality, openness, and professionalism. And such value runs through the entire management team to all team members. So in addition to having people of high caliber and a value-driven team, there's also an effective system in place to ensure the professionalism of complaint handling. From the force, we have a lot of guidelines and orders, like we call the police general orders, force procedural manuals, and complaint manuals, all provide a concrete framework for CAPO officers when they do about their investigations. And they serve as essential guidelines for our officers to discharge their duties in quite a prescribed manner. And secondly, we do have a performance pledge which measure our efficiency. For example, complainants are updated regularly at various stages of the investigations. If complaints are not made in person, CAPO will need to acknowledge the receipt of complaint within 1 working day, and thereafter update the investigation progress in every two months, and inform the complainants of investigation result within 10 working days after IPCC's endorsement. Thirdly, our work is very transparent. All conversations and communications through telephone or in person are recorded. So complainants can also choose to be interviewed on video. IPCC is undoubtedly independent and impartial, but how about the capacity? Actually, they do have adequate measures and capacity to ensure CAPO's investigations is conducted properly and effectively. As mentioned by some speakers already, the Chief Executive appoints 27 IPCC members, while Secretary for Security appoints 110 observers from a wide spectrum of the community on the basis of their ability, expertise, and commitment to public service. There is also an IPCC Secretariat with 64 full-time working staff working independently to provide a strong support to IPCC. And in fact, their total manpower is much, much larger than that of CAPO. Also, I also need to mention the observer scheme, the unsung hero, as mentioned earlier. The observer scheme, we have put everything under the sun. The number of observers had expanded significantly through the years, from 65 in 2003 to currently a total of 110. Observers and IPCC members can conduct scheduled or surprise observations of any interviews and collection of evidence by CAPO. And last year, IPCC observers attended almost 2,000 observations with an attendance rate of 95%. In other words, the crucial part of the investigation, although done by our own police officers, CAPO, is all under the meticulous scrutiny of the IPCC. As I said, each and every reportable complaint are under the critical scrutiny of IPCC. IPCC can demand any relevant police document or request CAPO to conduct further investigation to their satisfaction. In fact, the robust monitoring and reviewing mechanism entails IPCC through raising queries on every single case, and it's not uncommon for CAPO to receive over 20 written queries from IPCC just about a single investigation. IPCC has also set up a serious complaint committee to dedicate attention to closely monitor serious complaints, such as allegations of assault or cases involving public interest. Serious complaints are treated with utmost importance, and then CAPO is required to provide a comprehensive report on a monthly basis. So to recap, we believe the current system, backing up by law and a time-tested, evolved two-tier system, is best suited under the current context in Hong Kong. CAPO officers are there to ensure a thorough and impartial and professional investigation. IPCC provides stringent scrutiny. Last but not the least, achieving the aligned objective of improving the quality of service provided by the force. So to conclude, one would have more trust and confidence in the system if they know more about it. Suitable engagement, communication, and enhancing transparency would definitely lead to more trust. I think to some of the audience here, after my sharing in the past 10 minutes, you would have more understanding about the current system rather than 10 minutes ago. So the same applies to the tripartite relationship amongst the IPCC, police, and the public. We can certainly do more to let the public know what we are doing. And the more transparent the system, the more trust we can gain. And I'm pleased to tell you that this is what IPCC and the police have been doing now. And this will more likely to be the road forward. And here, this ends my presentation. I thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Arena. I have to thank the guest speakers for their discipline in time management. So we still have 10 minutes to go before this panel closes. It's time for open discussion. Floor is open. So anybody in the audience would like to? Karen.
Thank you. All very thought-provoking talks just now. I do have one question, which I'm not sure who could answer this, maybe anybody who feels like they can. I noticed from the first two presentations that one of the common themes that appeared globally as well as in Hong Kong is that trust in police is significant, even though it has experienced these kind of ups and downs, generally is much higher than trust in government, whether that's local or regional, or local or regional. And I also noticed that trust in the police is far greater than in the criminal justice system and the judiciary. So I guess the logical question then is why? Good question.
Who would like to answer this? Chase, maybe you can share some international
Sure,
experience.
I'll take a stab. Is this working? I don't know the judiciary directly, but I do know that when you look at, if you look at the ways that people have information about things, and you think the most direct information you have is with a personal interaction, and then there are knowing people who've had interactions, and then it's moving away to, if we understand foreign affairs and national affairs, it's something in the media, right? So a fairly high percentage of people have had first order or second order experiences with the police in any given year. So it's more commonly that you're familiar with someone who's had a police interaction. I suspect that's lower with the criminal justice system. In other words, so I think there's something more immediate about the presence, the good interactions with police, or things that don't get escalated or moved to a criminal justice system. So that's just my beginning of a conjecture, of a hypothesis that might work that way. But I'd be delighted if anyone has any other thoughts on that.
Any other speaker would like to supplement? Dialogue.
Well, my answer would be more or less the same. I mean, if you believe in those kind of 6 degrees of social contact, that is very likely that within our social network, somehow we would know someone working in the police force or related field. And so you would be able to get some information and sort of background understanding of the work, and at least some sort of procedures of operation. And for judiciary, sometimes you find it so remote, and it's also something that you try to escape from. You don't want to really get engaged with that part of it. That's kind of social distance would be my hypothesis to answer your question.
Edwin,
A little bit more than that. Could it be
do you need a microphone? Tony, yeah.
Because, if you're in trouble, you tend to go to your parents if you're a kid, basically. And if you're an ordinary citizen, the first order of contact is not just per se a first order of contact. It's usually when you needed something. And it seems that really, the policemen you see in the streets and so on in all countries, that if you're in trouble, you could go to them, or in fact, they are the people that you see that would make you safe. I think that could be one of those reasons, and therefore the higher the police force is seen in countries, those countries tend to have lower crime rates. They would tend to have people who feel more safe. I mean, that's again a conjecture. I can't say that I actually have, any kind of objective data on that.
Edwin wants to say something.
I think the concept of familiarity can only be substantiated if the police is doing a good job. Otherwise, if the experience is bad, obviously, they don't have that level of trust.
Yeah. I think Chase has shown that there's national variation, so it really depends on the context. Tyler, you want to?
Well, but at the same time, I would like to underline the fact that I think for a lot of ordinary people in Hong Kong, the perception of the police force actually is something quite intriguing, because for a lot of reasons that I do have to go to your headquarters and somehow have to wait for one of your colleagues to bring me up to the office and that kind of thing. So I've been around in that Arsenal Street or area many times, and quite honestly, I'm always surprised by the way of how ordinary people approach the headquarters, including someone delivering the pizza. Walk in there and say, where can I find the number 695 of whatever row, Gloucester Row, whatever, tell me. Sometimes I was just finding mind-boggling, how come you walk into the headquarters of the police and expect someone from the counter to answer you that how to deliver your pizza? And by the time you find the pizza man is disappearing, someone get in and said, I'm looking for the Cosmo bookstore, is it nearby? I was like, wow, what is this? But, the familiarity, and also, I don't know how to describe it, but most ordinary people seems to treat the police force in Hong Kong as if it's just part of everyday life. And in this regard, I think, yeah, I would think that, probably you also chip in the part of that answer.
So if Robert doesn't, you want to say something? Yeah.
Well, if I could, then I could just go back to the data that we have. It's not just the data we have presented, but we have been working with the force for a very long time, measuring different aspects of their performances. So if I have to just put a very simple answer to it, I would say since we have been measuring people's perception of the police performance, put it that way, it has been on the very, very high side that we see very good positive percentages since the 90s. And when we go into sort of reasons, try to take out the reasons, then there are indicators like people's sense of safety in daytime and nighttime compared to other countries, and the conduct of individual police officers, and so on and so forth. And we found that from the 90s up to this moment, I think police credibility has been on the high side, to be fair. But very recently, I think the problem that we are facing of force and also other IPCC and other institutes is really a political, sociological, political environment. And this is something that the police could not really control. And a lot of institutions cannot control them. So I have been presenting that, of course, there's this general trend of, say, erosion of trust in Hong Kong, of course, in Europe and elsewhere. There should be a more macro reason to it, and we've been discussing it since in Toronto. But if you just look at the very technical side of the police, then I would say that the recent challenges to the police is really all these political, sociological pressure. But in the past, it has been conduct of policemen, the corruption. Where we are seeing corruption-free police, and it seems that since the 70s, we are seeing the police developing in such a direction that it's been seen as a clean force. And so with the data that Chase has presented across different nations, if in those nations that people believe or do not quite trust that the police is corruption-free, then they probably do not trust the police at all compared with other institutions. But I believe the police in Hong Kong, at least personally I feel, is totally corruption. Of course, there are individual problems, but in general, it's very clean, it's very efficient, and in terms of safety, we have high standards. So if we're going to explain the reason for that, the plus reason for that, I would say that. But the negative reason for the sort of drawing back, the pulling down of the credibility, I would just say is really the political reasons in the recent few years.
Thank you, Robert. Looking back, I think the symposium today should be 2 days long rather than just 1 day, because we have so many heavyweight speakers and so many interesting subjects to cover. But this is a symposium Hong Kong style. We are very efficient. So we've done a lot in just 8 hours, and I have to hand the microphone back to the MC. And thanks to our speakers who have taken precious time out of the busy schedules to share their thoughts with us, and thanks to the audience who have been so attentive and asked interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your moderation. Thank you for your moderation, and thank you all speakers. Please stay on the stage. May we now invite IPCC Chairman Dr. Neo to present souvenirs to our speakers. Dr. Liu, please. Dr. Zhong, please. Professor Harrison, please. Ms. Lau, please. Professor Lloyd, please. Will all the guests come a bit forward, and we're going to take a group photo. Thank you, everyone, and please take a seat off the stage.